So, like I said, Grant Fleming, one of a group that I formed a couple of years ago from Georgica Sustainable Landcare Group. My passion has been NSF for the last 40 years. I was a teenager when Pete first went into the Bowling Valley, and through years of thinking that crazy next door neighbour was doing stuff that my father did different. He was doing things different, this crazy next door neighbour. Love him like hell, but it's taken a while. So anyone that actually thinks they know what he's all about, no, you won't. I've known him all my life, and I still scratch my head some days. But the principles that he understands, he's one of the only people that can look at the Australian landscape and know that there's a system in the landscape. And the old Australian landscape, as he calls it, has got the stories in it. It shows how, once you can read the landscape, it will show you how the whole thing's made, right? Now you're talking millions of years. So the process, the erosion process, is a natural phenomena. What controlled the erosional process is it's water movement, which has caused the erosional process over millions of years. Then we go into the vegetational cycle. So there has to be something in the landscape that controlled the erosion process for the landscape to be even here today. So the only reason you are here today, right, is there's something that controls that landscape. So what is it? Someone tell me what it might be. Vegetation. Okay, so vegetation is the key to our survival on Earth. Okay, so that's green surface area. So whether it be a tree, something that everyone's going to shudder with, a weed. A weed is a plant in a place that we don't understand. Okay, so that's what a weed is. So it's in doing a job which has a control mechanism. That plant, and there was a couple of questions that I heard earlier about the giant devil's fig. Most plants, so-called weeds, will only live in their own residue for up to 3 cycles. Okay, so when you've got a plant that will dominate, it will only dominate for 3 cycles. Then there's a process of plant progression. Then the next plant will go into the cycle. Now, we don't live long enough to know what all the cycles are, right? We're talking hundreds of years, some of these cycles. So as man, we look at and think maybe 25 years, oh, we should know everything. We don't know nothing, right? We only know 6% of what's in the soil, the biology in the soil. We've got scientists that are working around the clock to try and understand what's in the soil. We know 6%. It isn't much. It isn't much at all. And we're supposed to be making these great decisions. You're kidding me. The basic stuff we've got to understand is plants repair and maintain the environment. Okay? That's your number 1 rule that you have to think of. Number 2 rule is water. If we have no water, we have no blood in the soil. Water is the lifeblood of our soil. If you have no water, you have no vegetation. You have no biology. So water is critical. So the other thing that we learn from plants is there is a thing called nutrients. The boys touched on it earlier. The nutrient cycle. When the nutrient cycle is broken, guess what? So do the plants get broken. There's more of the non-edible plants, which are weeds, come into the cycle. So the more degraded your landscape becomes, the more that the plants are trying to say, hey guys, we've got to fix this. And someone said about cat heads. Cat claw, okay? It's something that no one wants to eat. So the basis of that would be saying, leave me alone, go away. Leave this country alone. But we've put fences everywhere, so our poor old animals can't move. So the migration of animals that went from the lower country where the good grasses and the fertility is to the higher ground, we've stopped them doing that. So when we talk about the Indigenous people having the tracks and the higher country for the rainforest, 100%. There's a process of migration. And it's not only through the animals, it's the nutrient cycle. When that nutrient cycle is broken and it washes down the hill, guess where it ends up? In the sea. It's gone. You can't retrieve it unless you buy a lot of seaweed. So keeping our water, our nutrients, as high up in the cycle in our system is vital. So I've got a couple of little videos I'm going to just run through, just to show you a little bit of basics about water cycle and nutrient cycle. I stole them off the water storage guys. Brilliant stuff. Very worthwhile. That's my little property up at Georgica. A few little nut trees. It's 300 acres up there. Slowly building it as a place for everybody to go and look at and laugh at. But that's the plan, is having it as a teaching property. Yeah, so when the boys were here earlier saying about the vegetation on the higher ground, how vital is that? Essential. 100%. And the other thing is the microscopic life, the insects, the birds, all go back to the high country. That's how it used to work. Right? All your stock used to go back to the high country and do their feces on the high country. What's that create?
Good soil.
A fertility cycle. Okay, so the fertility cycle, when the stock can go down to the lower country and eat the better plants from the higher nutrient, right, and move back up to the high ground and do their business, that is a fertility cycle. The trees on the high ground, the rainforest, vital on the high ground, because that is the mechanism that maintains and sustains the landscape. Right? So if there wasn't a process here for the last thousands and thousands of years, last million years, we would have no landscape. What's our rich floodplains from? The erosion was the first process. It's what we see now, yes, but what's caused all the high rich soils? What did we say? We picked one word before. Vegetation. Okay, so all soil, all rich soils has come from vegetation. Okay, you can grow your soil again. And that's what I've been talking about the maca guys for 20 years since I've been pruning macas. Grow your soil again. Stop the erosion process. Put bloody inter-row crops in. Change how you're doing things. Right, when we had the last flood, everyone blamed the poor maca farmers for the red mud. I love going down to the businesses and saying, give me back me mud from down there. You know, I will admit, not this farm never moved. Nothing moved on that farm. All right? The other one that I bought a couple of years ago, which I've been trying to fix, I lost 4 inches off one side slope. That's thousands and thousands of tonnes of soil. Gone. And I've been trying to fix it, but not quick enough, obviously, because Mother Nature beat me. Mother Nature does lots of things to keep us under control. That is one of the things. The erosion process. Vegetation stops that erosion process. Okay? So, one of the things we've already said is vegetation is the sustainable thing of the landscape. Okay? When you take any vegetation and you make it a monoculture, you take away the biodiversity. And not only in the landscape, but in the biodiversity in the soil. okay? And I'll keep it really simple because I can't remember big words, but glue. Let's talk about the glues in the soil, right? There's millions of biological functions in the soil, and all the scientists are still gathering all the data, so I'm just going to call it glue. This plant, this plant, this plant, this plant, all add to the fungi and the nematodes and everything that build that soil. So when the glue is broken through, I won't say bad farming practices, I'll say naive farming practices. That cycle then is broken down. That erosion process will happen. And it's the same that you'll get, and there are different landslips. There's a geological landslip, there's a vegetational landslip. There's quite a number of different ones. There's a beauty one out of Jigai, which is horrendous. It's the whole hillside has just moved. It's a cracker. And I love going around. Sorry?
Why aren't those trees a danger for landslip?
Because the vegetation that I've got there, plus I've got contours in there as well.
Space between the trees and the rows, so there's grass.
Yeah, it's only a young orchard yet, right? So they're only 15-year-old. So you've still got very high density of grass, right? So while I'm a bit sore and slow today, that's why I wanted Gwyn to talk, I've spent the last 2 weeks pruning macadamias with a chainsaw. So I do individual limb removal with chainsaws on macas because of how vital it is to maintain ground cover, right? Because when you lose ground cover, you lose your biodiversity. Your biodiversity keeps the healthier trees. Some people have to think that they've got to have bare dirt, right? You heard on that little video that bare dirt, no water retention, right? It forms a hard, just like this floor, water straight off it. So your plants, your vegetation acts as like an aerator. So it allows the water to penetrate the soil. Okay, so the more penetration you can get into your soil, right, that's why I promote aerators in orchards, because a lot of orchards can't get enough plants to grow in their orchards. So we've got to try to do it a little bit of mechanically wise and try to enhance the system wherever we can. So getting sunlight, if you don't get sunlight into your ground of your orchard floor, you're not going to get grass to grow. So, and you know, there's orchards out there that shouldn't be orchards anymore. But what I did when I first went there, because of finances, chainsaws don't cost me much. I went in and pruned the whoop out of one section, and I'm halfway through doing the other section. Because I'm a broke farmer, I've got to go off and fix everyone else's farms and get paid for it. So the work that I do on my own place always comes second fiddle. And financially, that's not a smart business move, but you do what you've got to do to keep the banks happy. A lot of it's through, okay, let's look at the farming systems that we've got. Everyone that come to Australia, except for the Aborigines, come in from Europe, correct? Or thereabouts. So what's Europe got in a climate that's different to us?
Snow.
Thank you. Snow. Winter. Right, so they freeze over for 4 or 5 months of the year, correct? So what happens to that ice and snow?
Melts down in summer.
Melts down. What's that do?
Gives you water.
100%. It rehydrates the landscape. Do we have that here? No. A little bit down in the Alps, down in the high country, but across the landscape, no. So that process has to be 100%, and this is what Pete always goes on about, 100% controlled through vegetation. We lose our vegetation, we've lost the ability to rehydrate our landscape. Okay? And everywhere you go, the process of the vegetation being lost, you go out west, you see where the boys have ploughed it to an inch of its life. I won't say I had the pleasure, but I drove to Cobar for swinging spinners for 8 years. And there was some of the paddocks out there, you're just seeing it just blow away. It was, you know how you see the water, the ripples in the water like a wave? That's exactly how some of the paddocks were out there. just watching them blow away. It's all the fertility going. You know, it takes years and years and years and years, hundreds of years to build up that fertility that they're losing in one dust storm. So vegetation is vital. Okay, how we get that vegetation as an individual farmer, that's unique to most farms, how you manage that, but that is the process that we have to maintain. Vegetation and recycling the nutrients. Did you have a question back there somewhere? Do I see a hand poke up? No, I was dreaming. Yep. I prune, like I said, I believe every macca orchard will lose a row, okay, to get that sunlight on. But then those trees grow, but the difference that when I look at it, I like structure, right? For me, I'm a mechanic by trade, I like structure in the tree. I don't like seeing 6 leaders and no laterals, because fruit grows on laterals. Really, that's a really simple thing of a macadamia tree. If you've got a heap of verticals, you're going to get minimum fruit. You have good laterals, good airflow, you're going to get better fruiting. Pretty simple stuff. It's not rocket science, but I'm afraid there's a lot of people struggle with it. So, when you talk about returning the cycles of nutrient, I haven't got a good photo of it. Up on this ridge there, that's a laneway. This section here, when I planted that, was as bare as what these boards are. So I locked all the cattle up there. I fed them all there for 12 months in the drought. I put the hay, I bought hay, I had to buy hay because I hate selling me pet cows. So I fed them all up there on the ridge. The next cycle of rain, I had red clover that high. The agronomists come and said they've never seen anything like it. It's all fertility movement. Okay? So as farmers, as basic farmers, our cattle, whatever, feed them on high spots. If you're going to put some hay up, put it on high spots. Gravity will always take control of it. Always sucks, it always goes down the hill. Water and gravity moves it. Okay? So it's all about getting your fertility high up the system as you can. Like I said, the animals did that themselves before we shoved fences everywhere. Okay? The animals always go to the high country for warmth. A lot of the birds, protection up in the trees. Right? So that built the cycle. Return that cycle. Okay. Anyone got another question they want to shoot? Yep.
Do you want to talk a bit about the water that we can see in the bottom here and what your thinking is with...
Well, that's actually the next door neighbour's dam, that very bottom one. He's got one up here there, but you can see...
Or have you got another slide? Or?
Yeah, not of this. I've got some other ones there, which I'll show you. But that there's a eroded gully which I've repaired and taken water out around. You might pull a couple of those other slides up, Pete, soon we...
Can I ask,
Yep.
do all macca farmers spray their trees?
Unless you're organic and you're going broke.
And how many of them are growing native macca trees?
None.
So they're not
There's,
productive?
the tetraphilias, which are the native tree, there's... I know going back before they released the last lot of maccas, there was 86 different varieties of maccas that they've grown. Most of them come from Hawaii. They managed to send it all overseas and develop them over there, and we cleverly brought it all back, as we do with most stuff.
So there are no native macca farms?
No, not with tetraphilias. I've got one tetraphilia tree on my place, but if Ian was here, he could talk about it. But yeah, well, they're native to the north coast. Yeah, they're a rainforest tree and they're native, but no, they've got their nuts, but and they're actually doing a mapping of all the native original forest trees. So that's a good thing to preserve the natives, you know, the old varieties. But yeah, so that's actually in play at the moment. Yep. Even just the simple planting, as I've said to people about putting herb gardens around their farms to enhance the bee food, because most of the farmers now got on the idea that the little native bee is a great benefit to the macca farms, but they forgot to put any food out for him. So, you know, these macas are great. They flower for 6 weeks of the year, and they expect the poor little buggers to live after that. So, there's sections of my place that I've put in herb gardens to feed the native bees, even though I've only got 4 boxes, but they'll grow. So,
The benefit of the comfrey was because it's got this deep root system bringing the nutrients up.
Yep.
You know,
so that's
utilises as well.
that's a benefit of the herb system that's out there. Once again, there's a book from the States, there's 600 different plants in it, and each one of those plants, it will tell you the different minerals that are brought up by the so-called weeds. Okay, so all the tap-rooted plants bring up a unique set of minerals to that particular plant. So that's,
Even cat's claw is a medicine.
yeah,
It's supposed to be good for cancer.
there's a lot of weeds, and I can remember when I was this high, Patterson's curse, we had it growing in abundance down in the Hunter, and Dad and I were out there doing our best to get rid of it. But when I left the Hunter, I realised that they come out of Sydney and by the bag loads. And I thought, you know, that's crazy. You know, I could have actually made some money. And we spent all our time trying to get rid of it. So, yeah. But that's just a herb that's in our environment. And when we talk about the indigenous food, there's tons of stuff we don't know about. You know, we just don't understand. And that's where the cultures need to be interlinked. The European culture, the indigenous culture, because there's food trees out there. They survived for 60,000 years on a lot of the vegetation that was in the landscape. Yep.
So you're spraying for Sagaster weevil?
Unfortunately, yes. He's a great little fella. I think the bush turkeys give him a fair run for his money, but yeah, I've only got, I think, 6 bush turkeys on that place. The other place, I counted 35 in about half an hour. Yeah, the other afternoon. So, and they do a lot of foraging. The bees aren't foraging in the orchard. It depends on what your grass cover's like in the orchard. I've had a couple of guys, and I've tried to get some more information on it. Sagaster weevil is a bit like us. He doesn't like doing too much at night time, so he goes to bed. They don't forage that much of a night. They actually forage of a day. So if you're going to spray for Sagaster weevil, it'll be late before too dark, but yeah, in that period of time, because
Do you use integrated pest management?
I do. I do, but Sagaster weevil, he's out on his own. He really hits pretty hard. Yeah, that's why I think it's very important to have things around your orchard for food for your bees. Yeah, besides just, you know, like your inter-row flowering, which a lot of the guys are doing, are actually putting the inter-row flowering out. But if you're going to spray for Sagaster weevil at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, those bees will still be in that flower. I think they've both got their job. When you go out, this year would be one of the worst flowerings I've seen for macas. 741s, a couple of the other varieties, bloody terrible. Across most of the north coast, there's only a couple of little pockets of young 741s that have done well, but I was on 2,000 trees the last 2 weeks, and out of those 2,000 trees, you wouldn't have been able to pick a kilo of nuts up.
Is that too much water or not enough cross-pollination?
What happened this year was the humidity and the moisture in well, that's what we believe it is. The moisture in the air, your rosemes had blight on them, and it just killed the flowers off. Too much moisture in the flowers, just not enough time to dry. So it's a bit of a damned if you do and damned if you don't. I'm trying to build up the system here to enhance my water storage, and that'll enhance the water cycle. But I'm shooting myself in the foot with the macas, because the more I enhance the water cycle, the better off I have environmentally for the environment and the strength of the property, but I'll actually do myself damage in the orchard if I don't have good airflow. So airflow is critical. It's my belief is we're going into a cool cycle. Okay, people might think you're mad. When you look at cycles, I don't look at 2 or 3 years, I look at hundreds of years. And when you go back through history, cycles are big loops, the major cycles in the weather events. And I think we're coming into a cooler period, and that will run for probably, except for the 2 droughts, there's supposed to be a cracker according to a couple of the long-range weather forecast guys. They reckon one in 2030, they reckon it's going to be a cracker. So, but in actual cycles, I think my belief is the weather cycles take a long period of time, and they might be 25 years, 30 years in a cycle event. So, and when you talk to some of the long-range forecast guys and the guys that have done some graphing, I've seen some stuff that's been done from NASA, and that's the actual long-range, they're talking about 100, 150 years cycles. So, yeah, it's quite interesting when you start delving in a bit of that stuff. So, yes, we have little up and downs in the system, but the big system, it's out of our control. But one thing I do 100% believe in is the green surface area. Right, so we've seen that little video, those little things that the trees expire, right, which then goes up and seeds our cloud, seeds to give us our rain. That is vital, right? So the less trees we have, less chance of seeding. They talk about we do it, the governments are supposed to do it, seeding clouds to try to develop rain. Whether that goes on, that's not my field, I wouldn't have a bloody clue. But I do know that the trees do seed rain, and the more green surface area we have, the better we have at controlling our general climate, because it all comes back to the same inner circle, I believe. Yep.
I just wanted to ask a question.
It takes it to another level. Probably, do you want to flick to a couple of those slides, please, Pete? One of the things that Peter Andrews worked out was the actual understanding how the landscape is built. Right? There is a sequence in the landscape that doesn't lie. You can go from the North Coast to Queensland to WA, South Australia, wherever you go, the landscape structure is the same. Okay, you go overseas, it's the same. So it's all laid down as an erosion process through water. Okay, then you have your wetland, your floodplains is all built through vegetation, right? The floodplains lay down, as we've seen, you go out to Jigai, there's a beautiful section that's been relayed with rocks this big, you know. But when you look into an eroded gully system, you'll see all these layers of rock and soil right through the landscape. That's geological structure. Okay, so when you look at a landscape and you start to understand how a landscape's been built, you can look at it and say, I can rejig it. How do I rejig it? Vegetation. Right, there's a guy that we've done some work with a guy called Paul Newell. He bought a place that was 100% working. He degraded it and rebuilt it in 40 years, just to prove a point that he could destroy a piece of country, then rebuild it. Now, he's a sheep farmer. He did that through vegetation. He fed the sheep on a contour, so he put out grain, so he fed all the sheep on a grain contours. The vegetation started to act as its own contour. Okay, so that's water retention. So as that system built, as that vegetation built, and it took years, that process developed. Now, me being impatient mechanic, I put that in, right? That's my vegetation contour to start off with. So what I did was I put the water straight into the landscape. And when I went and did the first couple of courses with Paul, because he's quite respected in the industry, I said, I'm not going to live long enough to do it the way Paul did it. you know, because he spent 40 years doing it. I'm a bit impatient. So when I said to you about where I fed the cattle, right, it was just above here. I haven't got the shots of it on there. But that ground here was bare. It was just like these boards. But now it's got clovers and kikuyu and everything. The other day it was a foot deep, but I mowed it. No. That particular contour has put in an extra big one because I wanted to catch everything off that hill because I didn't want to lose any.
It just gets caught in the run.
Yep. So every contour is different that I've built, and I've designed them all different so that I can show people there's different ways about doing it. That, yes, was a big excavator. You can do them with the back blade of a tractor if you want a small one. We've done quite a few like that. So,
Did you seed it with the
that I did as soon as... No, I actually put me being lazy, I went and bought a bag of seed mix from McGregor's and put it out with a super spreader. I ran over it with the harrows to start off with, so it fluffed everything up, and God willing gave me a drink of rain after it, and it come up. I've got photos somewhere buried away there, but the millet and stuff's higher than the tractor.
and have you got Soteria out there?
No, oh yes, sorry, I have. It come in when I bought some hay. So this is another little one we did. This is above that big contour, the big one's down there. That's another little one I put in. No, I'll tell a lie. That's the same one after the water. The next one's up there. I'm missing me shots. But that just shows you that'll just seep through that bank, and it does. The other ones I've got, the other banks I've put over the other side, about 30 feet down, you can see where the vegetation changes. It's just incredible, changes. So both this contour and the other one I can actually pump into if I want to. I did everything so I can put water in it. This one here runs around this whole escarpment here of eucalypts. The runoff is set for 2 spots. Actually, this is one of them. You can see the vegetation just changes height a little bit there. So this is about 30, 40 metres long. It will run down into those trees, and it'll run around the corner into a dam, pond, and then it also comes back and waters that whole escarpment. So on the other side of the farm, when we did some work with the council 3 years ago, Stuart ran a NSF course at home with the council, and we put in some basic works there. I never quite finished it on that particular day because they had to pinch the dozer to go fight fires. It was when all the fires hit us. I said to them then, I said, once I rehydrate this landscape, you'll get the koalas coming back in. This year, we've got GPS sightings of 3 different males, and I've got some lovely little photos of a female with a bub on the back. So that's just by changing the landscape hydrology and actually getting some. It's like if I said to you, you pull your boot off and have a munch on that old bit of leather, or you go and get a nice juicy steak. What are you going to prefer to eat? So it's whether it's hydrated or dehydrated, and that's no different to our landscape. It's pretty simple stuff, you know. So it's all about how you perceive things. You know, so once you do different things, you can achieve some great stuff. Yep.
Seems to be a lot of farmers on low country managing their creeks and trying to retain the water in their creeks with logs and rocks and all this sort of stuff, which is pretty exciting.
Yes, 100%.
Can you tell us about that?
A little bit.
Can you want to share? I think that's amazing.
Okay, so
Water run away all the time.
unfortunately I haven't got this particular photo, but it is quite relevant to this particular contour. Remember I said I wanted this contour to catch all the water off that ridge. That's why I built it as big as it is. Okay, I've got 2 dams at the bottom of this escarpment. This is like a big amphitheatre escarpment, and down here are 2 dams that I built. Last year we had, before like Christmas back, 21, basically we had, I think it was in our area, 600 and something mils of rain for the main rain event we had. Before it started to rain again, the dam, and because it went about 6 or 8 months with basically very little water, the dams in the valley, all the dams around, were half to a third empty. So there wasn't much in the dams at all. My 2 dams were still full. Okay, and it was all come back down, and until I put this in, they were the same. So once I put this in, it slowed the water flow down, but it rehydrated the landscape. It held it in the structure of the soil and slowly let it out. Okay, so this is what, when you say that you want to slow the flow down in the escarpments, in the floodplains, these are the kind of things we need to do up in our headlands of our catchments. So where we had wall-to-wall forests, because it was, thousands of years ago, it was all forest up in these catchments. It's not there anymore because we fixed it. We're clever farmers. That's an artificial way of doing it. Putting water back into the landscape. So when you talk about the river systems, okay, a really simple explanation. Think of it as a wine glass. Okay, and you've got, there is a couple of pictures. The wine glass is like that at the top. That's your valley, right? Your river system. The further down your erosion process goes, the more the side laterals of the landscape is drained. So the further you go down the V, right, the more that the water in the landscape is drained. Okay, but there's a trick to that. Not so bad here because of our rainfall. You get out in the drier country, what's a major problem? And it's going to be huge. 100%. After this wet weather, salinity is going to go ballistic out in that drier section. Okay? We've got patches of it here now that are sticking its head out. Why do you think? A what? No, just the opposite. 100%. Why has the salt washed out of the landscape? You're learning. Come up here. You're doing a better job than me. So our vegetation, every single living plant retains minerals. Most of those minerals are salt-based. Right? So when we take out all the vegetation and plough our paddocks and do whatever we do as great farmers, we put the salts into the soil. They don't disappear, they stay there. So as our water tables drop in our landscape, what happens? Bzz, you just failed. Yes, they do. Vegetation, right? Sorry? 100%. That's what happens. The water in the landscape has reduced. The salt doesn't change. It stays in the landscape. So the concentration in the water of salt and minerals is increased exponentially. Now, this salt rises thing, whew, I've seen Pete stand there, chuck salt up for years in the air. I've never seen it float away yet. He really does get some great experience, Pete. There's a thing called clay in our landscape. What's clay?
Colloidal.
Sorry?
Colloidal.
Yes? It is the most confined minerals that we have. All right? So it is all the minerals, the densest we can get them. Right? It's the next best thing to rock. We know. We get clay up here, we dry her out, what's it turn into? Nearly bloody rock, unless you drop it, but it's a hard substance. Okay? So what happens is the water moves laterally along the clay. So when we have a concentrated water problem, right? Concentrated salt problem in our water, it moves laterally along the clay layer. It might be 5 k's away, but it sticks its head out down there where gravity says it's allowed to, because it moves someone help me out with that big word, horizontally on the clay layer. That's all it is. You've destroyed the way to hold the minerals here. She goes through here with water, pokes its head out down there. Really simple. That's how it works. How do we fix that? No. Thank you. Vegetation. So how are you going to get vegetation to grow on a piece of salt there? I've told you the answer. Yeah? Why?
Because it'll hold the water.
Add fresh water. All right? Salt does not... salt stays below fresh water. Fresh water will stay on top of salt. Okay? Stuart's got a great little thing he does when he does the NSF courses. He puts salt water, gets a glass of water, and then he gets dye, puts it in the salt water, trickles it into the glass. Guess what? The top, that much of the glass has the dye, the salt. So the salt stays on top of... Sorry, I've stuffed that up. The other way around. The fresh water stays on top of the salt. So the salt is pushed down into the landscape again. So, mulch, vegetation, and the fresh water, you fix your salt bands.
Can you still put contours in on
What?
flatland?
100%. So, one of the things that Peter worked out was how the landscape worked. Okay? And one of the parts of that is how the floodplains worked. So through the floodplains, there are sandbars. Okay? Now the indigenous people, they loved it down there because they were wet, marshy lands. Okay? Wetlands, marsh areas. When the first settlers come to the country, Burke and Wills and all those history books will tell you that they were wet, marshy lands for hundreds of acres. So that told you that there was an area, they couldn't even ride their horses through it, but they fixed it. They bombarded it with cattle. More so cattle to start off with, and they ate them out. So that fixed it. But then what did that do?
Compacted the soil.
And
Eroded.
started the erosion process. One of the many things. Right? That's one of the things on the floodplains that caused the problem. But in that floodplain, it looks a bit like your hand with sandbars running through that. And that's how the floodplains were built. There's sandbars all through those floodplains. Just have to believe me. I haven't got time to go into that. But when you say about, can you put contours into floodplains? 110%. The property next to Peter Andrews, where at Towan Park, where he did all the work, we own the one next to it. Our well, Dad dug a well in, him and my uncle in 56, I think it was. They dug a well down to 35 feet to try and get a drink of water. And it was down through a sandbar all the way down, basically zit. Couldn't do anything with the water. It was too brackish. So what's that?
Salt.
Right. So what's that tell us?
It's getting washed down.
Lack of fresh water. Keep it simple. So that's what it told us. Okay, lack of fresh water down in the bottom of that well. So in 91, we had another small well. It was an old wooden slab well, so I don't know what year it was put down, but it's certainly before Dad went into the valley in 1950. And as I was growing up, I used to make a lot of clover, hay, etc. But it was slowly disappearing and getting taken over by khaki weed. I love that stuff. Every time I went anywhere near the house, Mum would kick me in the bum for dragging it into the house. So down on the flats in the sand, and the sand was growing. You could see the sandbar actually increasing. So in 91, Pete came over and we said, because I'd been watching what Pete was doing and helping him over at Tarwin Park. In 91, I got Dad to agree to do some work on home. So we put a contour in across the floodplain. We went through one sandbar and Pete's dozer was 15 feet in the ground. That was one sandbar. So then after we got the main sandbar done, the cross cut through the flat, we had a good amount of rain up in the Noah. It recharged that whole flat in one rain event. Now, hang on. Peter Andrews, yep.
Is that the guy that drops trees over creeks?
Yep, same guy. So we put this in, and once we had that big rain event, and it took 6 months after that, and the reason why I know it filled the floodplain is because the well, that was the wooden slab well, that was 20 odd feet down, and I had trouble getting water out of it for the stock, filled to the brim. Then once the vegetation increased, we had clover in water that deep floating, and people say, no, even the scientists come over and had a look, that were over at PA's place. No, clover won't live in water. 6 months, it was knee deep in water. Happy as Larry. Because you changed the landscape hydrology from a negative to a positive. That's another subject. Okay, so there's a lot in it. But that well that my dad and uncle dug, Dad nearly fell in it. Pete went over and showed Dad, and it was only a couple of feet from the top. So it recharged that whole floodplain. So yes. Now, what does that tell us about landscape? This is important.
That it's fixable.
It's fixable, yes. Storage. We talk about water storage, water retention, right? They've been yapping on about it for how long in the government departments. There's examples out there all over the country now, how we can fix the systems. There's billions of litres can be stored into the landscape, just in the floodplains.
Do you know much about biochar and how that can hold water in the soil?
It's a piece of the system. It's like a big jigsaw puzzle. It's a couple of the pieces.
And how do you use it? Do you know more about that side?
I think the gentleman that's coming next will probably answer some of that.
Sorry to throw it.
Yeah. So it's a part of the puzzle. I'm trying to give you just an overall view of lots of stuff to totally confuse you. Yep.
We've been going out near Inverell for the last 10 years, and
Yep.
just in that time, a lot of the wheat growing country and a lot of the farmers out there are starting to do exactly what you're talking about, doing big swales. And
A lot of the...
we were just out there recently, and
Yep.
it is so rich compared. We were there in 2019,
Yep.
trucking around when it was a major drought, and it's a completely different landscape now.
Yeah.
And they're doing that more and more.
Unfortunately, in the 70s, land and water were established to mitigate our water in our landscape. And they very successfully put in a lot of these drains, and that's exactly what they did. They actually drained the landscape. And RTA were no different. I can take you out through Bathurst and out through there. There's gullies that have been created from off their roads 30, 40 feet deep. So unfortunately, the practices from everybody has been very similar. It's hence the reason why I started this Landcare Group, is that I can go back to the grassroots and show people, do by example. I said to me mate, because I had a couple of health issues, and I said to me mate, I'm going to stay at home and start doing stuff. I'm going to lead by example. So that's why I've started the Landcare Group. That's why I'm starting to do this stuff. Pete's been yapping at me for years, but unfortunately I had to pay some bills The bank always likes their little bit, so I had to keep going away. Then I bought another farm. Then anyway, you know, cycle gets bigger. So it is interesting. The answers are out there. Yes, we can fix our landscape. Yes, we can return it to for the Indigenous people on how they looked at it. Yes, we can return it to rainforests in sections. Okay? We have the knowledge. It's just a matter about implementing it. Hence the reason why I come and talk to you.
It's also a matter of resources, like are there solutions that don't involve heavy machinery?
Without a doubt. What did I say about what Paul said? How he did it? He fed his sheep on the contour, right, just with the grain. That vegetation that slowly grew, it's a slow process, and I said, I'm not going to live long enough. Okay? So my next door neighbour, when he bought into, and Ian's not here today, he had something else come up, so I'm let down by 2 blokes today. I said to Ian, once he'd cleared a heap of land, I said, go and buy yourself 50 bales of hay and put a couple of rows out like that. I said, otherwise you're going to lose this hill. So it's all about looking at your landscape and understanding what you can do on your little bit of turf that makes a difference. Yep.
I just wanted to add for, you know, a smaller, we don't run sheep, or some of us have only got small veggie gardens, but you can cut logs and lay them along the contour, even just a log or your sticks, or don't make a burn pile, lay it along your contour.
100%. The first thing Peter made me do was go build a bloody garden on the worst bit of the farm that I could find. He said, righto, once you start growing stuff there, you start to understand what I'm talking about. So it's all about, and that was 100% related to fertility. Okay? It's all to do with the fertility movement. Don't let it get away. Once it's gone out to the sea, you're not going to get it back. You're not going to buy enough fish to get it back. You're not going to buy enough kelp to get it back. That there stops the loss of fertility movement for me. Except for what does escape around the corner into the rainforest, but the rainforest gets it.
What about the neighbour downhill? Do they get robbed of groundwater?
Okay, good question. When I first came up to the North Coast was 2000, I played with Eucalypt Nursery for a couple of years, and then the Eucalypt industry went arse up. Pete was trying to do some work at Barramel for Jerry Harvey, and he said, come down and help me. So we went down there, and he talked me into staying there, playing farm manager for Jerry and doing the systems. So one of the things we had another horse stud below us, the Thompsons, below Jerry Harvey's place, and long people in the valley. And Pete and I started to do the work, and they reckon they were losing all their water. So we had every government department that you could poke a stick at come out and try and stop what we were trying to do. Cut a long story short, the next year they turned around and said, shit, we've got more water than we've ever had. So what did I say to you earlier on about the glass, the wine glass effect? You slow the flow down, you fill the wine glass back up. You recharge your landscape. Okay? It's not just that little valley where it runs down. You're charging the whole floodplain. So by slowing the flow in your creeks, by those little barriers, those little rock barriers, there was a great clip that Gwyn had, which once again, Gwyn had it.
2 years later.
And the people on the NSF course seen it, of the people in, what country was it? South America, wasn't it?
That was in Colorado?
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
They put in 20,000 rock weirs in 20 years of their life. And it got the American government so interested in what they'd done, there was another valley next to it that had no work, so they did a comparison of what was lost, what was retained. The government did that, and it's astounding, absolutely astounding, the difference in the landscapes. So, and that's what it's all about. It's slowing the flow down. Yep.
Does this work for flood mitigation too?
Yes, 100%.
Have you had any contact with there's a mob sort of doing, flood mitigation studies and CSIRO and all that?
I'm-
Calling for submissions and...
I personally haven't. Stuart has. So the council had Stuart in there the other day looking at some bits and pieces. But that's all the process, hopefully, that will happen in the next 6 months.
Talked to them and they were like,
Yeah.
this is really
And like I said, they did the course at my place 3 years ago. So they run around with their blinkers on. I suggested to them all, every 12 months, come back and have a look. Do you know how many has been back? Zit. Not one. So that shows you the interest of out of that course, unfortunately. And there was also Rouse water people there as well. So any more questions? Because I think I'm out of time. Thanks very much. And any questions, fire them at me later if you want to come up and bash me. And, down the track, if you want me to come and have a look at something, sometimes the coffee won't cover it, but sometimes it does. So just, yeah.
Did you want people to, did you want a bit of paper to go around if people did want to?
Yeah, if you like, yeah. Yep.
Get an email list or
Yep.
You said something about being able to send us some information.
Yeah. Has everyone got their email addresses down here?
I have everybody's email addresses that registered.
So anyone that hasn't put their email address down, please do that, and we'll make sure you get a copy of Gwyn's paperwork.
And where do you advertise your courses at your farm?
That will happen this year. Sorry, next year now. Lose track of time. Hopefully, February, March, we'll be running the first one at home.
But where do you advertise them?
It will go out through landcare groups and wherever I can put them out. Hence the reason why it's all part of the landcare movement. So I'm pushing the landcare people as well.
Are you in soil care as well?
I am in soil care, yes. So it'll go out through as much avenues. Mate, I can't even turn one of those little boxes on. That's not my thing. I've got my own strengths. That ain't one of them. So I've got to rely on people like Pete to do that work for me. I'll suggest and they will do the doing because that's not me. I'm out in the paddock.